All right, so I'm originally from Colorado. Anybody been to Colorado before? Beautiful, beautiful state. Any skiers or snowboarders out there? Anybody? Come on. So I did some skiing as a kid, but eventually, as I got older, a mentor of mine, a guy I really looked up to, said, "Hey man, you should come with us this weekend. We're going snowboarding." I was like, "I don't know how to snowboard. Like, don't you guys go without me? I'm sure, sounds fun, but no." He's like, "No, man, come on. I'll stick with you the whole day. I'll teach you how to snowboard. You gotta learn." And I'm like, "You really want to do that? You want to hang with me all day, teach me how to snowboard instead of going to your friends?" He's like, "Yeah, man." Oh man, he was just like a really nice guy. And so I did. I went there and I got my boots, my snowboard, and everything. And y'all, let me tell you, there are few things as humiliating as learning to snowboard, okay? There is no natural impulse in my body that says, yes, this is how you snowboard. It felt so weird and clunky, and I was falling constantly. I mean, even just getting on the ski lift, I was like, hand back, trying not to like fall off and everything. Finally get on the ski lift. It takes us to the top of this mountain, and we get all strapped in. And he's telling me, okay, this is how you do it. Here's a couple things to do. And I get up and start going down the mountain. I start sliding, and then boom, I fall on my face. I was like, oh man, all right. I get back up and start going down the mountain a little bit more, and the fall on my face again. Like, ugh. And so I'm trying as hard as I can, man. I'm listening to his instructions. I want to make him happy and like say I can do this, but man, I just kept falling. I couldn't figure out how to turn my back leg, and see, I'd fall on my face, and then I'd fall on my back, and then I'd fall on my face, and like my whole body was in so much pain learning how to snowboard. But man, Alan, my friend, was behind me the whole time saying, "Dude, you got this, man. You can do it. Come on." And he'd help me get up. He's like, "Okay, do this differently or try this, whatever." And I wanted so badly with every fiber of my being to just like make him proud, because he was spending so much of his patient energy helping me learn how to snowboard. And so finally, I'm like, I just kind of grit my teeth. I was like, I am not going to fall. This next time I get up, I am not going to fall no matter what happens. So I hop up, and I'm on this snowboard, and I start going straight, and I'm just, again, in my mind, I'm just determined, I'm not going to fall. I'm not going to fall. Nope, no matter what happens, not going to fall. Just keep going straight. Don't try to just go straight down this mountain. And so my sheer, like, willpower, like, was successful for a while. Like, I'm going down this hill, and I'm not falling, and I hear Alan behind me like, "Yeah, David, you got this. Keep going." And I'm like, all right. Like, I'm puffing up with pride. Like, I'm not falling and everything. And there's this thing, I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's called gravity. And the thing about gravity, I'm no scientist or mathematician, but I know when one object starts up at the top of a mountain and continues to go fast down the mountain, this thing called acceleration picks up as you start to go down. And so I started picking up some speed as I'm going down this mountain. So it started easy, but then I'm like, oh man, like I'm feeling the wind like in my face, and I'm starting to pick up speed. And I'm not turning. I'm just straight line to the bottom of this mountain. And so I'm going down this mountain, and I'm picking up speed, and he's cheering me on, and I'm getting really excited. But at the same time, I'm getting close to the bottom of this mountain, and I realize in this moment that I have no idea how to stop. And I'm seeing these cute little kids, and they're like bunny, winter coats, just like on a rope, like learning how to ski. And they're so excited to go on the bunny hill. And I'm picturing myself impaling them at the bottom of this hill as I'm just going straight, right? And so I'm going down, and in my head, I'm like, don't stop, don't fall. But at the same time, I'm like, don't murder a child also. And so I'm kind of freaking out, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop. So eventually, I just decide to take a nosedive and just, do it gracefully. So I just go, boom, and I just throw my head into the mountain and just start going down the mountain like an avalanche, right? Now, the thing is, we were going pretty fast, right? And so I didn't tell my friend Alan that I was, going to kamikaze, boom, throw myself into the mountain. So he was trying to keep up. He was coming so fast. So I'm sliding down the mountain, and if I'm coming down this way, I'm sliding, my head down first, and I look up, and I just see Alan coming at me like 100 miles an hour with his snowboard right at me. And in a sheer moment of like self-preservation, I lift up my snowboard to protect myself, while he at the same time decides to try to jump over me with his snowboard. So our snowboards connect, and I launch him into the air where he full frontal flips, lands on the snow. We go for like 100 feet, just slide to a stop, and I just look at him. I'm like, dude, are you okay? He said, yeah. Are you good? I'm like, yeah. Wow! Nailed it. I'm a snowboarder. Yeah. No kids were murdered that day, thankfully. Thank you, Jesus. Y'all, I kept messing up and failing, and there was so much a part of me I wanted to give up, but I couldn't. And the only reason I couldn't do it is because Alan was cheering me on the whole time. Every time I failed, he was like, dude, you got this. Come on, get back up. You got this. Come on, man. And his encouragement lifted me up every single time. You see, guys, there's this thing, like when we fail repeatedly, it can bring a lot of shame and guilt, and it can deactivate us to the point where we just want to give up. Like, man, I can't do this. And I'm talking about more than snowboarding, right? I'm talking about life in general and our decision-making and our relationships with other people or family members or friends. When we fail, we believe things like, I can't do this. I'm not as good as so-and-so. I'm not cut out for this. And shame and guilt are powerful feelings that can lock us into these emotional states of paralysis. So that's what I want to talk about for just a few minutes tonight. Now, I don't know your story, but maybe at some point in your life you made a choice that at the time felt really small and harmless. You know, maybe you cheated on a test, or you lied to your parents about where you were going, or you grabbed $5 out of your sister's wallet without asking, and no one got hurt, and most likely no one would ever find out, and it didn't feel like a big deal at the time, but there was still this level of guilt of like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have done that, right? Or maybe you've made a choice that feels a little bit heavier than that, and the consequences are a little bit greater. And maybe you spent your Saturday night drinking at a party and woke up the next day not feeling great about the choices you made the night before. Or maybe you went too far with a boyfriend or girlfriend. You can't seem to shake the disappointment you feel in yourself. Maybe you hurt someone so close to you, so deeply. You said things you can't take back, and it's destroyed the relationship, and you just feel so much shame and guilt over what you've done. No matter where it comes from, guys, guilt is a powerful feeling because guilt can leave us with this lingering sense of frustration and disappointment because we know we aren't living the way we should be. And those feelings can make us want to throw in the towel and just give up, right? So sometimes giving up looks like just avoiding whatever makes us feel guilty, like we hurt a friend, so we avoid them for a little bit. We made mistakes we aren't proud of, so we just try to keep our minds off of it. We decide to do everything we can just to avoid letting the guilt creep back up. And guys, here's the thing. One thing we all tend to do when feeling guilty is back away from our relationship with God. We do the one thing is the opposite of what we should be doing. When we should be running to God, sometimes when we sin, when we mess up, we do the other thing. We run away from God because we don't want him to know. Like we can surprise God or something, like sneak up on him. No, right? Now, for some of us, our avoiding the sources of guilt is a little more obvious. Like, you know, we stop coming to church. We avoid our Christian friends at school. When we feel guilty, we do our best to avoid the whole God conversation if we can. You know, for others, it's more subtle, right? Like maybe we still go to church, but we stand in the back, right? We go to small group, but we don't say anything in small group, right? We sing the songs, but we try not to think about what the words actually mean. We talk about God, but we never talk to God, right? Either way, we do what we can to create distance. We let guilt deactivate our faith. But guys, what if I told you we didn't have to live this way? What if I told you that the guilt and shame you felt over your mistakes and your failures in your life, whether big or small or anywhere in between, you don't have to live under that shame. You don't need to let that shame and guilt deactivate your faith. Man, in the story we heard tonight, yeah, we can cheer that. Come on now. In the story we heard tonight, we saw this fascinating interaction between a guy named Peter and Jesus, and we're going to revisit what happened there, but first we're going to rewind a bit because what happened before this moment tells us a lot about what happened in the moment. Now, Peter, everyone say, Peter. Peter was one of Jesus' closest disciples. Jesus said, Peter, you're the rock. I'm going to build my church on. Like, Peter was a big deal. Peter left behind his career in fishing and everything familiar to him to follow Jesus. And because of that, he wanted to get things right. And Peter wanted Jesus to know just how committed he was to following him. And in this story we're going to look at, it takes place during Passover, this important time of remembrance and celebration in Jewish culture. And the disciples didn't know it, but they sat down for this meal with Jesus that was going to be their last meal with him before he got arrested and eventually he died on the cross. And Jesus knew it was coming. So after dinner, he made this huge statement, Mark 14, 27 through 28. He says, all of you will desert me. Ooh. But after I'm raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there. Now, this is some pretty awkward after dinner talk, Jesus. Like, not only did Jesus say something about dying, right? He said his friends who'd been by his side for 3 years were going to bail on him. Now, Peter, he was rattled. And typical of his personality, real passionate, real zealous, Peter spoke up to make sure everyone knew that he was devoted to Jesus. And he said, Mark 14, 29, Peter said to him, even if everyone else deserts you, I never will. Suck up. Right. I'm kidding. He wasn't a suck up. I really believe Peter meant that. I think Peter, in the moment, emotional as it was, thought, I will never leave Jesus. I'll never be my story. He really believed that in the moment. But he missed what Jesus was saying. Jesus' thoughts about dying, coming back to life, and he just goes right on to trying to prove himself. He misses what Jesus is trying to teach him, and he goes to trying to prove himself. It's as if he's saying, listen, Jesus, these other guys are going to let you down, not me. So what Jesus says next, no doubt, came as a huge shock to Peter. Jesus looks at him and essentially says, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, hey, not so fast, Peter. You're actually going to deny your belief in me 3 times tonight. And Peter goes, me? Psh, no, you're confused, Jesus. Like, remember that speech I just gave? I will never do that. And Jesus says, hey, man, tonight you're going to do this. And guys, not days later, not weeks later, within hours, Peter lied on 3 different occasions. People saw him. Jesus was arrested. Hey, he was being taken to the cross, and people came up to him, and they were like, hey, you're that guy that hangs out with Jesus, right? And he was like, no, that's not me, right? Little girl came up to him, a little girl, and says, hey, you're the guy that hangs out with Jesus, right? He goes, no, that's not me. No. He was, man, guys, can you imagine this? The guy just made that speech, and he's supposed to be the leader of the future church, gets scared to tell this girl that he's a follower of Jesus. Man. So, Peter misses it, man. He misses it. He even told Jesus, Mark 14:31, he said, even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. And yet he still denied him. Now, the book of Mark goes on to tell us that when Peter realized what he had done and that he had just fulfilled what Jesus said, he wept. Can you imagine how he must have felt? He let himself down. He let his friends down. But more than anything, he had let Jesus down. How could he not feel guilty? Now, Peter could have easily given up right there and then because who would blame him? He'd made some pretty big mistakes. Culture was ready to cancel him, right? He declared boldly that he'd be with Jesus no matter what, but took it back under pressure. He messed up. And it was bigger than that, guys. Not only had Peter abandoned a close friend, he had abandoned God's son, which is crazy to think about because we've all probably wrestled with this emotion that we've let God down. But Peter did it in person, and then Jesus had died, so Peter couldn't even go back and apologize. How was he supposed to talk to God after that? To pray, to face his friends, right? But the story isn't over. Now, Peter goes back to what's familiar to him. Right? He'd been on this journey with Jesus, and he wasn't sure what to do from there, so he just went back to his old life. He just went back to fishing. He got in his boat and said, I don't know what to do. I messed up, so I'm just going to go and fish. And when we pick up in the book of John, chapter 21, Jesus had died on the cross. He rose from the dead, and he showed up to meet his disciples just like he said he would. And who's there when he goes there? Peter. Jesus sought Peter out. Jesus was giving Peter a second chance. Of all the guys, right? Peter didn't deserve this. And yet Jesus went right back to Peter. Now, this is huge, guys. See, Peter could have given into his guilt, let it deactivate his faith. He could have gone back to being a fisherman and forgot everything about his previous life and moved on, but he didn't do that. Peter saw Jesus coming to them. He saw him on the beach. He said, in the text says, Peter jumped out of the boat and swam to him. I mean, Peter didn't sit there and be like, oh man, like, what's he going to say? Maybe I should cower or hide, whatever. No, Peter was like, oh, there's Jesus. I need to go see him. And so he jumps out of the boat and he swims to him. And he's so excited to see him, even though there's probably a little bit of guilt and shame there. And Jesus gives Peter a second chance to make things right. And when someone does that, it's called grace. And so this time Peter gets it right. Jesus looks at him. He says, hey, Peter, do you love me? He says this 3 times. Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And Peter replies in John 21:15, says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. So Jesus replies to Peter with an invitation to keep following him. And he says in 3 different places, he says, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, and follow me. Now, he's not talking about actual lamb and sheep. Like, he's talking about his people, God's heart for humanity. He wanted Peter to go serve people. That's what he wants from all Christians. With each word, Jesus is extending grace to Peter right in front of our eyes. Why? Because here's what Jesus knew then, and we know now, is that Jesus is forever for all. Forever for all. There's not like a limit to God's grace. He extends grace forever for all. Jesus, he doesn't want you to get stuck in your guilt, guys. He doesn't want you to be paralyzed in shame. He wants to set you free so you can have this life of joy and purpose because Jesus is for you and he's for you forever. Sometimes I think we get this weird view of God as this like angry deity, like some twisted kid in the sky trying to fry all the ants with his magnifying glass. Like, God isn't like that. He's not looking for ways to punish you. He's looking for ways to save you. That's why Jesus, when he rose from the dead, he went right back to Peter, the guy who denied him. He said, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? He didn't die on the cross for us, guys, so that we would live in shame and guilt over our failures and mistakes, because grace is greater than guilt every time, every single time. And guys, because of grace, we can come back every time. We don't have to hide or run away. We will feel guilty at times. Sometimes that guilt reminds us that there's sin in our lives and we need to run back to God. Sometimes it could be a helpful tool, but instead of it driving us away from God, it should drive us toward his grace. Back in 5th grade, I remember being in class and I showed up and I got all my books out and I put them on my desk, and teacher got up and she's like, all right, guys, books away, it's test time. And I was like, oh, I totally forgot. It was some kind of geography test. And I was a fairly good student. I just completely forgot. And immediately I went to panic mode, like, no, I'm going to fail this test. I'm not prepared. Like I'm going to fail. This is going to affect my grade. And so I just started justifying, like, anything I can do to save myself in this moment. And I get the test in front of me. I'm like, I don't know any of these answers. And I'm just kind of like stressed, and I'm just kind of looking around the room, just like, I don't know, looking for an answer, I guess, when I realized that right behind me, there's a map of the area that the geography test was over. And I think, oh man, she forgot to cover that. And I was like, if I'm real subtle, I can just, peek back here, write a little answer down, peek back, write a little answer, because I'm in the back row. No one can see me, right? And guys, I cheated on every single answer on that test. Every single one. Yeah, it's not something to cheer for. It's not something to cheer for. Guys, I got up and I turned the test in, and I sat down, and I thought I would feel relief, like, oh, I problem solved, I figured my life out, I found a solution. But I did not feel relief. Immediately, my heart was just pounding on my chest. And I knew deep down that I had done something wrong. And no one would ever know, but I did something wrong. And so I sat there, and I felt like sweat was just coming down my forehead. Like I was getting hot, and I was just kind of shuffling. I watched other people struggling with their answers. And y'all, the shame I felt, the guilt I felt, because I was like, I already turned it in. And I'm like, what do I do? And finally, guys, I think sometimes God in his grace gives us perspective in those intense moments. And he said, and I just felt like as a fifth grader, man, just a little bit younger than you guys, I felt like God said, do you really want to give up your integrity for an A? Is that really worth it? Is it worth the guilt and shame and regret? And I just knew profoundly that the answer was no. Thankfully, in that moment, I had the courage to get up. I went up to my teacher and just real quietly, because I was so embarrassed, and I said, Mrs. Millar, I just want you to know, I looked at the map behind me, and I cheated. And I mean, obviously she was disappointed, and she looked at me, and with her eyes, I could tell she was disappointed, but at the same time, she was like, thank you for telling me. And yeah, I got a 0 on that test, but I think I got 100 on the integrity, right? Like, I think there are these moments, guys. And let me be clear, guys. I don't want to present myself as like, oh, I'm perfect. I've done it right every time, because I have screwed up. If I started telling you all the things I've done wrong in my life, like, we'd be here till like years from now, okay? This was just a moment where I think God appeared in my guilt and helped me turn a corner. Just like he appeared in Peter's guilt. Man, he just denied Jesus, and yet Jesus showed up. He said, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? See, guys, we have a very real enemy. It's not a person. Satan's been around for a long time, and he knows if he wants to stop people from discovering Jesus and worshiping God, all he has to do is convince us that our past, our failures, our mistakes define us. When in reality, they describe us, they don't define us. And so he wants us to get stuck in that shame, in that guilt, and so that we don't think God can use us. But Jesus made it very clear to Peter. He didn't drudge up the past. He didn't make Peter feel bad. He just asked him 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And you know what, guys? That's what Jesus is asking you tonight. He's saying, do you love me? Like, really, really love him. Ask yourself this question. Do you really love Jesus? Do you want to spend more time with him? Do you want to read his word, his scripture, learn his plan for your life? Do you want to read his story, get to know his heart for people? And do you love him enough to share him with other people? Because that's the next step, guys. That's it. Peter wasn't meant to be fishing for fish. He was meant to be fishing for people. And Jesus came with that reminder. He said, Peter, I've got a plan. Go feed my sheep. Go take care of my flock. So let's get to work. He says, don't let your guilt over your failure stop you. Like, don't let it stop you from snowboarding that mountain. You've fallen, but you can keep getting back up, David. You guys can get back up. You've got a story to tell. You, right here, you're 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, doesn't matter. You've got a story to tell that someone in your life needs to hear. And your past doesn't matter. Your mistakes don't matter, guys. They don't define you, okay? They describe things, but they don't define you. And so, guys, embrace God's grace and go tell somebody about what Jesus has done in your life. You don't need to be super eloquent or know all the answers, but go tell somebody about this Jesus who changed your life, because you're going to go back home, and you're going to see your friends back home and your family members, and people are going to ask you, hey, man, where you been at? You've been gone for a week. And you could be like, oh, I was just at this camp thing, whatever. Or you can be like, hey, let me tell you how Jesus changed my life, all right? Guys, let me just leave you with this. Jesus was a perfect, fully God, fully man, lived a great life, gave his life on the cross, rose from the dead 3 days later, not just to give you forgiveness, that's an important piece, but to give you a purpose, guys. And go be kingdom workers. Get out of here. Go change the world. Let me pray for you. Jesus, I look at this room and I see a room full of kingdom workers. I see a room full of world changers. So God, I pray for each and every single person here, Lord, that you would meet them tonight. If they are wrestling with some shame or guilt like Peter was, God, that you would free them of that and remind them how much grace you have for them, that there is nothing your grace can't cover. There's nothing your grace can't cover. So Lord, help us be honest. Let us confess our sins to each other so that we may be healed, James 5:16, and just help us live in your grace and your purpose and your joy. In Jesus' name, amen.